Okay, class, it is now Monday, April 6th, and we are here back in our virtual classroom for the first time, here to talk about Macbeth at long last. So, we last left off in the play at about Act 3, right? And you'll remember that in Act 1 and 2, Macbeth was getting everything that he ever wanted, right? So the old king, Duncan, he's dead, right? He's been killed, stabbed, buried, no more Duncan. And his two sons, Malcolm and Donalbain, of which the more important one, by the way, is Malcolm, they've fled the country. They fled Scotland, with Malcolm going down to England and Donalbain heading over to Ireland. So what this means is that Macbeth is now in charge. He's gotten that kingship that he's been so hell-bent on. Lady Macbeth is the queen, and, well, the state has now been taken over by Macbeth. So, first of all, the witch's prophecy from the beginning, saying that he's going to be Thane of Glamis, Thane of Cawdor, and king, that's now come true, because he's now the king. And second of all, it also means that Macbeth is, well, now at the top of the mountain. So all of the other characters that you might remember, Lennox, Ross, and all of those minor characters, they all work for Macbeth now, because he's the king, and he's in charge of the state. So, that brings us at long last to Act 3 of Macbeth, right? Specifically, page 113. The scene begins with a soliloquy by Banquo, who has not, before this moment at least, had a soliloquy before. So, he says, "Thou hast it not now, King Cawdor, Glamis, all, as the weird women promised, and I fear thou play'dst most foully for it. Yet it was said it should not stand in thy posterity, but that myself should be the root and father of many kings. If there come truth from them, as upon thee, Macbeth, their speeches shine. Why? By the verities on thee made good, may they not be my oracles as well, and set me up in hope? But hush, no more." So, this soliloquy is very significant because it tells us a lot about Banquo and his mindset. Specifically, Banquo here he's revealing that he knows exactly what has been going on, right? When he says that line, "Thou playedst most foully for it," right? So, I fear thou playest most foully for it. So this guy is not a fool. He knows that Macbeth has killed Duncan in order to become king, right? He is well aware of that fact, but he isn't blowing the whistle, which is to say, he isn't trying to tell other people that, hey, our new king just brutally murdered the last king in his sleep and blamed it on his sons, right? He isn't telling anyone that. Instead, what he's thinking about is how this can benefit himself, right? If we go back to the soliloquy, right, when he says, "Why, by the verities on thee made good, may they not be my oracles as well, and set me up in hope," right? When he says that, you might notice in the glossary in your book there that verities means truths, right? So he's thinking, well, hang on. Those witches apparently were telling Macbeth the truth. So if they were telling him the truth, then they surely were telling me the truth as well. And you'll remember, Banquo has his own prophecy that says that Banquo's not going to be a king, but his sons, his children, are going to be kings, right? And so in Banquo's thinking, he's got his son Fleance, and he wants Fleance to be the king, because he thinks that Fleance, well, would be a fine king, and he's watching out for his son as a parent. So Banquo loves that idea, right? So here in this speech, we see that he's not about to out Macbeth as a murderer, right? He's not about to try to overthrow Macbeth, but rather he's trying to figure out how he can benefit from this situation. He's trying to think, all right, King's dead. That's bad. My friend here almost certainly murdered that king. But how can I take advantage of this set of affairs? How can I sort of wet my beak here a bit, right? How can I get a piece of this pie and make sure that my son is next? And this tells us an enormous amount about Banquo's character. For, before this, he was sort of the good guy, right? He was scared by the witches, but, he still, stayed away. He certainly didn't try to murder anyone when he met the witches. But we see, this is not the behavior that you would want from someone who's going to be either a hero or a role model or anything like that, right? This is a man who might not be as bad as Macbeth, but is still looking out for his own selfish benefit, and doesn't seem to care very much that Macbeth has essentially staged a coup d'etat and is ruining the kingdom. So Banquo is not out for Scotland, Banquo's out for Banquo, right? And how much better of a person that Banquo is, well, maybe that can be our first question, right? So, is Banquo any better than Macbeth? So, what you can do, by the way, is send me an email to this with your answer to this question. Doesn't have to be a particular length, could be 1 or 2 sentences, could be whatever it is you think, but just send me an email at, of course, faisal.ahmed@tdsb.on.ca, right? Toss me an email answering that question, right? And tonight I will read your answers to that particular question. So, nevertheless, it is an important insight that we get into his character, right? And do remember, for the purposes of understanding Shakespeare, a soliloquy is always the truth. Right? So these are his real thoughts, right? This whole thing about how he wants to benefit from Macbeth's actions more than anything else. So, well, remember that Macbeth knows Banquo's prophecy too, and he, of course, does not like it. So he pretends that Banquo is still his friend and invites him to come join him for a feast, right? We see him sort of emphasizing it in Act 3, Scene 1, line 31, which is on page 115 of your book, where he'll say things like, "Fail not our feast," right? Making sure, Banquo, you better get in here, right? And Banquo says, "My lord, I will not." And Macbeth then emphasizes, we hear our bloody cousins are bestowed in England and in Ireland, not confessing their cruel parricide, filling their hearts with strange invention. But of that tomorrow, when therewithal we shall have cause of state craving us jointly. Hie you to horse, adieu, till you return at night. Goes Fleance with you, right? So, again, he's blaming Malcolm and Donalbain for the murder. We're not worried about that right now. What we're really worried about is this here, right? He's saying, oh, you're going to come at night for our feast, and Fleance, your son, is going to come with you, right? Right, Banquo? That's what you're going to do? You're going to be there at night, right? So the reason he keeps hammering that point down over and over is that he's plotting to kill the guy. Kill Banquo and his son. So this is Macbeth deciding, alright, I'm going to hire some assassins. They're going to wait for him at night. And I'm going to make sure that Fleance is with him, right? Because, of course, the part of the prophecy that he's really concerned with isn't really necessarily about Banquo, it's about Fleance, right? That Fleance is going to inherit the throne instead of him. Now, before we move on, we should remember that Macbeth has no kids, right? Lady Macbeth has not given him a child, right? But he is still very, very concerned about the idea of inheritance, right? He's really wants to, number one, have a child, and number two, make sure that that child becomes king, right? So when we talk about this next soliloquy, we should keep that in mind. That brings us to Macbeth's soliloquy, which is probably one of the most important soliloquies in the play. So you'll find it on page 115 to 117 of your textbook, Act 3, Scene 1, line 51 to 79. So Macbeth says, after Banquo leaves, "To be thus is nothing, but to be safely thus. Our fears in Banquo stick deep, and in his royalty of nature reigns that which would be feared. 'Tis much he dares, and to that dauntless temper of his mind he hath a wisdom that doth guide his valour to act in safety. There is none but he whose being I do fear, and under him my genius is rebuked, as it is said Mark Antony's was by Caesar. He chid the sisters when first they put the name of king upon me. Then, prophet-like, and bade them speak. He chid the sisters when they first they put the name of king upon me, and bade them speak to me. Then, prophet-like, they hailed him father to a line of kings. Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown, and put a barren sceptre in my grip. Thence to be wrenched with an unlineal hand, no son of mine succeeding. If it be so, for Banquo's issue have I filled my mind. For them the gracious Duncan have I murdered, put rancours in the vessel of my peace, only for them, and mine eternal jewel, given to the common enemy of man, to make them kings, the seed of Banquo kings. Rather than so, come fate into the list, and champion me to the utterance. Who's there? So, what this soliloquy shows is that Macbeth, first of all, fears Banquo. He knows that Banquo is a smart man, he's a patient man. He doesn't know what Banquo is necessarily going to do, but he does know that this is the one guy that could potentially beat him, right? That's what he means here when he says, my genius is rebuked, as it is said, Mark Antony's was by Caesar, right? So he's thinking, okay, Mark Antony was a genius, but he lost to Caesar. I'm a genius, and I could lose to Banquo. So he is really worried about this guy, and he knows this prophecy is coming, so he is, well, understandably perhaps concerned. So that's why he wants him dead. Now that is, as we talked about in class before, a bit of a logical leap, right? Again, just because Banquo's going to have his children be kings doesn't necessarily mean that Macbeth has to murder him, right? He could have a daughter and she could marry his son, and that's that. Problem solved. But of course Macbeth does not see it that way. Now, we talked about this speech very briefly in class before we left, but I feel it's worth talking about again. So, first of all, we've got what he says right here at the end. Yes, here it is. For Banquo's issue have I filled my mind, for them the gracious Duncan have I murdered, put rancours in the vessel of my peace, only for them, and mine eternal jewel given to the common enemy of man, to make them kings, the seed of Banquo kings. So this line in particular I want to really emphasize. So, as we discussed in class, I believe, right before we left, I kind of don't remember that day very well, the eternal jewel is his immortal soul, right? His soul, his divine essence, if you will. right? So he's got an internal jewel, and it's given to the common enemy of man. And who's the common enemy of man? Well, that would be the devil. So essentially, Macbeth now feels that his soul now belongs to the devil, and one of the big thrusts of the speech is that he does not want to go to hell for Banquo's children, right? So, in order to make it worth it, in order for the murder of Duncan and his own personal damnation to be worth it, right, he has to, essentially kill Banquo and make sure that it's not Banquo who gets to sit on the throne, or Banquo's children. It's his own children that get to do that. His own children, which, by the way, you'll see do not exist. The other thing here, and we did talk about this in class briefly, but I want to talk about it a little bit more, is that he now feels free of any real consequence for his actions. If your soul already belongs to the devil, that means you're going to hell, and if you're going to hell, well, guess what? There's no consequence for the actions anymore. You just do things, and it's going to, happen regardless, right? So if you know you're already going to go to hell, then why worry about being a good or a bad person? Right? You can do whatever you want, right? Because, well, if hell is the destination anyway, then, well, why not add to the body count, right? So, again, before, Macbeth was very reluctant to kill, right? We saw all of the convincing he needed to kill Banquo before, right? We saw, I beg your pardon, all the convincing he needed to kill Duncan before, right? He needed to have Lady Macbeth manipulate him, say, hey, be a man. But now, this Macbeth that we see here in Act 3, Scene 1, he's willing to kill Banquo because, well, if you've already gone to hell for Duncan, then what's it matter if you add Banquo to the list as well, right? So, the emotion that I would describe this as is probably going to be despair. Now, I know we did talk about this a little bit in class, but it's still worth talking about a little bit more right now. So, the question I would ask you guys about this is, alright, let me put it like this. Does Macbeth's reasoning here make sense to you? So what I mean by that is, okay, he's saying, I'm gonna go to hell regardless. This guy's my dangerous enemy, so why don't I go kill him? Or, in other words, if you were Macbeth, would you kill Duncan? Or kill Banquo? Right? Given the situation. So, what do you think? Is there a flaw in his logic? Or is there, is this pretty much a logical decision that he's making here? So, that means that Banquo is going to die, right? He's going to send the killers after him, and what that means in the play is that, well, Banquo, of course, is murdered, but his son, Fleance, manages to escape, and we'll talk more about Fleance probably on Wednesday or Thursday. But for now, he goes to Lady Macbeth, and he talks to her about what he's got in mind. Now, we did talk about this briefly in the class when we still had a class, but I think it's worth remembering now because this is going to have consequences for the rest of the play. So, in Act 3, Scene 3, line 15, which is on page 127 of your book, Macbeth talks to Lady Macbeth, and he says, "We have scotched the snake, not killed it. She'll close and be herself, whilst our poor malice remains in danger of her former tooth. But let the frame of things disjoint, both the world suffer, ere we will eat our meal in fear and sleep in the affliction of these terrible dreams that shake us nightly. Better be with the dead, whom we, to gain our peace, have sent to peace than to torture of the mind to lie in restless ecstasy. Duncan is in his grave. After life's fitful fever, he sleeps well. Treason has done his worst. Nor steel, nor poison, malice domestic, foreign levy, nothing can touch him further. So there, by the way, I just want to point out before I go on, we see a touch of guilt here, right? When he says that these terrible dreams that shake us nightly. So even though Macbeth seems to have moved on, he's still having dreams about the fact that he murdered Duncan, so there is still that piece there. But let's see. Lady Macbeth, come on, gentle my lord, sleek over your rugged looks, be bright and jovial amongst your guests tonight. So shall I, love, and so, I pray you, be you. Let your remembrance apply to Banquo, present him eminence both with eye and tongue, unsafe the while, that we must lave our honours in these flattering streams, and make our faces vizards to our hearts, disguising what they are. You must leave this. Oh, full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife. Thou knowest that Banquo and his fiancée lives, but in them nature's copies not eterne. There's comfort yet, they are assailable. Then be thou jocund. Ere the bat hath flown his cloistered flight, ere to black Hecate's summons the shard-born beetle with his drowsy hums hath rung night's yawning peal, there shall be done a deed of dreadful note. What's to be done? Be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck, till thou applaud the deed. Come, sealing night, scarf up the tender eye of pitiful day, and with thy bloody and invisible hand cancel and tear to pieces that great bound which keeps me pale. So, thank you for your assistance. Oh, this is Uranos, by the way. He is my assistant for this particular section. Good job, Uranos. So, what we're seeing here is this very important exchange here, where Lady Macbeth says, what's to be done, right? And Macbeth says, be innocent of the knowledge, dearest Chuck, as in, I'm not going to tell you. So, in terms of the how come part, there are a couple of different reasons we can look at. And I did know we did talk about this briefly in class, but I think it's worth going over. So first of all, maybe Macbeth thinks that he's good enough to do all of the work right now. As in, he thinks, you know, I've got this all under control. I don't need this wife anymore. I know how to do everything. Now, as we all know, Macbeth was actually really bad at killing, right? When he tried to kill Duncan, he messed up the plan, he brought the daggers out of the room, he was freaking out, right? It's Lady Macbeth who's really much better at this. So, you could look at this, his refusing to bring her into the plot this time, as being a bit of arrogance, as in he's sort of thinking, I'm the man now, I don't need Lady Macbeth to help me with anything. The other thing he could be saying is it could be a gender thing. Maybe he thinks, well, she's a woman, and she shouldn't be doing anything. All she needs to worry about right now is getting pregnant, right? So that I can have that child I've been wanting right now. So, you know, I'll just say, oh, dearest Chuck, you know, don't worry, you don't have to do anything anymore, right? So that is another possibility. The other thing we could say is, well, maybe he's trying to protect her. Maybe he thinks that he is the one who's going to hell, and that she, meanwhile, is maybe on the borderline. So it's better that he do this stuff all on his own, right? It's better that he has Banquo killed, because he's the one going to hell, while she, you know, yeah, she helped him kill Duncan, but she's on the borderline, right? So that could be his logic as well. So, what do you think? Send any questions you might have to my email, which is, again, I'll type it again, faisal.ahmed@tdsb.on.ca. Send any questions you want to that email address, and I will happily answer them, as well as the answers to my 2 questions in there, which were, where was it? Is Banquo any better than Macbeth? Or the other question, does Macbeth's reasoning make sense to you? Right? Send me your thoughts, send me your answers, and tonight at, let's say, 6 or 7, I will look at my email, I will go through your comments, and we'll see what each other are saying. Right? Do remember, this is something that I want to give some free marks for. Right? So you're going to be getting participation marks by participating here. But until then, I will see you guys later tonight, and I hope you're all having a wonderful day. Stay inside, stay safe, have a good morning, and I'll see you guys later.